Another BNR update, another cycle that Tamiyo and Oops All Spells dodge a ban. We're not going to focus on that today. Rather, I'm going to critically analyze the text of the BNR update itself, and we're going to decide whether or not WotC actually did their homework before writing this, or if this is another wildly out of touch BNR update. Let's jump into it. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU here for another Legacy video, but we're not doing gameplay today. We are breaking down the March 23rd BNR update, which was no changes across just about every format of Magic the Gathering, with the exception of a food chain ritual ban in Historic. The card's kind of fucked up in Legacy, so I'm not surprising that it destroyed a smaller card pool. Before I get going here, let me just say that today's video is brought to you by intotheam.com. I wear their stuff literally every day. It's really sweet. This one is called Acid Bones. It is a glow-in-the-dark t-shirt. It doesn't glow so brightly as to be like disruptive or anything like that, but it's kind of neat. And if you are interested in this or any of their other merch, you can use promo code ThrabenU to save yourself a little bit at the checkout line there. Or you can use the link that's down in the video description. Beginning tomorrow, they are having a massive sale with up to 60% off site-wise, so consider checking them out. If you like the things you've been seeing me wearing, they're really comfy. Today's BNR update features 3 paragraphs for Legacy, so it's a little light, but there's a handful of statements in there that kind of caught my eye while I was reading, and I went, is that actually true? So we're going to do a little bit of investigative journalism today, and I'm going to be doing sort of a critical reading of this BNR update and like looking at the data that we have access to, and WotC has much better data than we do. At least that's what we've been told. And I'm going to play a game of true-false, where I'm going to pick at some of these statements that they say in this article, and we can decide whether or not they are true. This was a lot of fun to make. Note that overall, I am unhappy with the BNR update. However, I 100% anticipated this being the case from Wizards of the Coast. So, you know, when the next BNR cycle rolls around, I will still have the same recommendations that I do as of right now. So that I don't have to stop my flow later on in the video, let me just say that if you need any Magic the Gathering cards, please consider getting them from my sponsor, toamagic.com. Use promo code ThrabenU to save yourself a little bit on the order. And if you need to host any deck lists anywhere, please use moxfield.com. I have only good things to say about moxfield.com. And as a side note, today I'm going to be drawing a lot of data from some other websites. One of those websites blasted me with so many ads that I will not be showing their website on the screen today, as after about the 80th flashing lights AI ad I got from them, I was just like, okay, we can't show this on screen. So with that being said, let's battle. So for a quick overview here before I start getting into the text, the Legacy section is relatively short. Ignoring the meme words here, this is the major paragraph of the article concerning Legacy, and then we have 2 short paragraphs here as well. So the majority of the space of the Legacy section is actually 2 deck lists. And I will be talking about both of the deck lists because I think they show very revealing things that are not actually talked about in this article. So summarizing briefly, the article covers D&T winning a Legacy Showcase challenge, Swords to Plowshares being a good thing to do in the format, as is shown in the form of Death and Taxes and Boros Energy, Dimir Tempo coming down in both metagame share and win rate, Oops All Spells falling off, Cabal Therapy coming back as a tool, and a rotation of different macro archetypes doing well and various decks taking their turns in the spotlight. There is not too much of substance here. So there is no data, no numbers, no win rates, anything like that. Cameo is not mentioned at all in the article, although Dimir Tempo is called out, so you can take that as a nod to Cameo if you would like. So since there's not a lot here, we are now going to read this very, very carefully, and it is time to play our game of True-False with the Legacy BNR update. Statement 1 that I'd like to cover. We've seen the format's top dog in Dimir Tempo come down in metagame share and win rate. So I'm going to take this as two separate statements here. So statement 1, Dimir Tempo has come down in metagame share. I don't actually think this is true, but it really, really depends on when this article was written. It is my suspicion that many of these articles are written well in advance and then just shelved for a few weeks. Dimir Tempo has been the top dog in Legacy for the better portion of the last year. If you look at the really any data set for the past year, Dimir Tempo should be the highest one and is still the highest one. So let's do some numbers here. If you look at the last 90 days on MTG Goldfish, Dimir Tempo's play rate is 13.8%, a good chunk of the format. At a 30-day window instead, we drop from a 13.8% to a 12.8%. So we are down 1%. If you look at a 14-day window, the last 14 days, it goes up from 12.8% to 14.4%, a pretty significant increase. And if you look at the last 7 days, it is down from that about 2% to a 12.3%. So we've boomeranged here in the last 90-day window with the data that I can look at here from 12.3 to 14.4, with any of those windows still resulting in Dimir Tempo having the largest portion of the metagame. And if we flip to some other data and we go and look at something like the Legacy Showcase challenges and the recent Legacy Super Qualifier, and we look at the data from the Legacy Data Collection project, the numbers recently actually go up, even from what MTG Goldfish has. So this article specifically called out the Legacy Showcase challenge, which had a 15.55% metagame presence for Dimir Tempo, and the last Legacy Super Qualifier had a 15.76% of Dimir Tempo. So I think that's enough to shut the door on that one. Dimir Tempo's metagame share has not come down. As it turns out, the blue-black core of Legacy right now is incredibly strong, and it is one of the best generic things you can be doing, as you have access to both discard and counter spells, and you can back up some very, very fast clocks that way, or alternatively, grind out long games with Tamiyo after you expend early resources like Daze, Force of Will, and Thoughtseize to stop your opponent's plan. What about win rate, though? Because metagame percentage and win rate are separate stats, right? So I think I have confirmed that Dimir Tempo's metagame share is not actually going down. What about the win rate? So if we look back at some of the data sheets from the Legacy Data Collection project, if we go back to January, the Dimir Tempo win percentage is absurdly high. So pulling some numbers from January 4th, in January, Dimir Tempo had a 57% non-mirror win rate. And just for those of you who don't tune into this sort of content very often, 55% is often like, hey, we really need to look at this deck because this might be unhealthy. And Dimir was absolutely crushing Legacy at that time. The BNR update that followed this data set would have been on Tuesday, February 10th. And at that time, we got what was honestly a pretty bad BNR update. It was pretty clear that Dimir Tempo was problematic. What has happened since is that people have, in my opinion, overcorrected for this deck to get it in line. So again, giving you those dates, February 10th was the BNR update. And when we get to that weekend and it is clear that okay, this is sticking around, we have to beat this, they are not going to ban this. People rallied, changed decks, and when you get to the data set for the 15th, the deck had a 40.25% the following weekend after the BNR update. It was just like, okay, we have to beat this. We will kind of take great cost in other areas to beat this. We have two more datasheets from the Legacy Data Collection project. The next on March 7th and the final on March 15th. On the March 7th one, Dimir Tempo has boomeranged back to roughly where it was before. And in January, we saw it at a 57% non-mirror win rate. And here on the 7th, we then see it at a 55% win rate. So not fully recovered, but largely has recovered. And then when we fast forward to a weekend, the weekend of the 15th, we see it just straight up batting 50-50 at a literal 50% non-mirror win rate. So we are seeing Dimir Tempo's win rate oscillate a lot. And I think there's two different ways that you can view this. Way number one is that you can view this as a healthy, functional metagame where there are weekends where this deck is better positioned than others. And way number two is this deck is out of line, and when people are not over-correcting for it, it will perform normally. And given the data that I have access to, I don't know if I can, with certainty, say, I think it is this or I think it is that. What I can say with certainty is Dimir Tempo has been and will continue to be the thing that is at the top of the metagame until we get a banning or another major printing that strongly shifts the metagame. Dimir Tempo is just generically strong, has been a force for a long time, is one of the singular driving forces behind the rest of the format. So going back to this comment here, I'm going to give this one a wash, because I think it is objectively not true that Dimir Tempo's metagame share is coming down, and I think it is probably true overall that Dimir Tempo's win rate has gone down a little bit over the last couple of months. We are maybe moving from a period where it was just always the best thing to play, where it is now often the best thing to play. And there is a degree of difference there. So I think I will give them passing marks on this one. You get the C. You got it half right, I think. So next I want to talk about Death and Taxes, which recently did win a showcase challenge, which is super cool. And the article talks about Legacy becoming fairer, and I will address that in a separate one of these bullet points, spoilers. And I want to cover this. One of the more observable symptoms of that decompression, that is Legacy slowing down, is that Swords to Plowshares has started to be a more reasonable part of the format. And I'm going to read this as Death and Taxes is a reasonable thing to play in Legacy. because I think there is a very, very different thing going on with Boros Energy that our author missed here. Or rather, Mardu Energy when we're talking about Legacy, because the discard is very, very important. So, how is Swords to Plowshares as a card? Death and Taxes, despite winning a showcase challenge, is perhaps not something that you should play in Legacy. And part of this has to do with understanding how the showcase challenges work. In a showcase challenge, I would expect an overabundance of Dimir Tempo. And looking at the data set that we talked about just a minute ago, the showcase challenge did have 15.55% of Dimir Tempo. And the Legacy Super Qualifier had a similar metagame percentage there. So if you, in maybe the winner's metagame, are expecting to play against an abundance of Dimir Tempo, that means that Death and Taxes is going to be very good in that winner's metagame, where this abundance of Dimir Tempo that you expect to generically do well is going to be. More generally, outside of this singular event, Death and Taxes is in a horrible fucking spot, folks. It is not a great deck. And they're like, I used to be a serious D&T guy, so like I will pick up this deck whenever I think it is reasonable to do so. I do not think it is reasonable to do so. If we look at something like MTG Top 8, Death and Taxes is at 2% of the Legacy metagame, trending downwards. Big, nasty, downward pointing red arrow on this one. And sorting on MTG Goldfish by the various time periods that you're allowed to sort by, Death and Taxes is sometimes not even in the top 15 decks of the format. And in the windows where it is present, it is usually deck list number 15, which is the last one that they actually put out in terms of images. So to say Swords to Plowshares is a reasonable thing to do doesn't track with me at all based on the data for Death and Taxes, which I think of as like the premier fair Swords to Plowshares deck in the format. And when you look at the data sets for what people were actually playing in some of these larger events, it's so clear that D&T was a bad choice for some of these events that in one of the events, only a single pilot registered D&T, which, like, damn, that is a statement. And it was not a small event either. It was like a 150 person event or something like that. And I think the call out of Swords to Plowshares here is just kind of missing the mark about what is important in Legacy right now. So when I look at this deck list, there is one thing that sticks out like a sore thumb that goes, whoa, that's wild and not normal. Did you catch that this deck has an entire playset of Clarion Conqueror? And Clarion Conqueror is a great card. Let me be very, very clear on that. This card is awesome. But this is something that you traditionally see from an Ancient Tomb deck that can power it out more quickly. This deck is an Aether Vial deck. This is a large amount of tension. And when I see tension like this in deck building, that makes me think, hey, this format is so unhealthy that this person is making decisions so that they can keep up with an unhealthy format. Because you like your deck building to be synergistic. You like to do things like take your Felia and use it to get more value off of your ETB creatures. And in the black-white builds that are more common in Legacy right now, you see things like Blinking Overlord of the Baelmerk and Orcish Bowmasters and all sorts of nonsense that makes for a very, very strong endgame. Well, what does Clarion Conqueror do? Clarion Conqueror covers the unhealthy things of the format. So this stops Tamiyo creature from attacking because it is 3 powers. This stops Tamiyo clues from being activated. This stops Tamiyo planeswalkers from being activated. To a lesser extent, this also is going to shut off some artifact mana from decks like Oops All Spells and cover one of the sideboard jukes, the Goblin Charbelcher juke. And in another section later, we're going to see that there might be some other things that this Clarion Conqueror is also trying to cover. So the author of this article looked and went, hey, Source of Plowshares is back. That's great. Whereas I, looking at this, go, the Aether Vial deck is playing Containment Priest because there is an extremely unhealthy graveyard deck running around that we need some snowball's chance in hell at spiking a win on in game 1. The Tamiyo decks are very, very unhealthy. We need a chance to cover Tamiyo more strongly than Swords to Plowshares does in game 1. So this deck can answer Tamiyo with Swords. It can answer it with Solitude, which it has the ability to get via Recruiter of the Guard. It can shut it off with Clarion Conqueror. It can shut it off with Skyclave. So when I look at this deck, I see something very, very different than what our author is seeing here in kind of doing the qualitative look at the data, where we're not looking at, hey, this deck won, but we're looking at instead, well, how did it win? Why did it win? And it's kind of funny to me that this article talks about Legacy decompressing, and then the Showcase Challenge winning sideboard starts with 2 Mindbreak Trap, 4 Deafening Silence. Yes, Legacy is decompressing. Never mind these cards that we absolutely need, or we've got no chance in fuck at beating the current format. This was very funny to me. I cracked up. So our Mardu Energy deck is going to get its own section a little bit later on in this video, but I want to break apart the idea that this is a Swords to Plowshares deck. When I look at Death and Taxes, that is a Swords to Plowshares deck. That is like a fair removal spell being used with fair creatures trying to just remove something from the board. And when I think about Mardu Energy, I'm not thinking about Swords to Plowshares basically at all. I'm thinking about the discard. I think that is very, very central to that deck's identity right now. And the article reads as Fair Cabal Therapy coming back is good. And when I look at this deck list, I go, this person, is Lederhosen? No, this was Lucas. I think Lucas looked at this metagame and went, 4 discard spells isn't enough for the metagame. I need more than that. So I don't think Fair Cabal Therapy is a sign of health. I think that is a sign of, I am struggling with the combo decks. I need to dedicate more of my game 1 resources to fighting back against combo. And one of the secondary functions of Cabal Therapy in this shell, generally speaking, is that it allows you to flip Ajani into your Planeswalker while generating some value, which is pretty cool. But a lot of times, that's not something that you dedicate your primary spell slots to. You'll normally have some Goblin Bombardments. 2 of those is pretty stock these days. But a lot of times, people will fit Lazotep Quarry into the mana base as a way to sacrifice Ajani, but that's the fair thing. Let me put that card on screen, actually. I think when you look at a Legacy deck and you see a Lazotep Quarry, that is a better indication that things are going well than main deck Cabal Therapy, I think. If you are expecting games to go on long enough that you could reasonably pay 3, 4, 5 mana into this thing to bring a creature back, that is a good sign of a format where you are settling in for a long game of Magic. I think when you go, I discard spell you on 1, that's not enough to buy time. I then need to discard you again, or you are likely to win. That is perhaps a sign that things are not necessarily as fair as the author might have us believe. So at the end of this section, I think that leaves us with Swords to Plowshares is perhaps not a reasonable part of the metagame, and it is perhaps the discard that is propping up the Mardu Energy deck, and the fact that it is just much more explosive than D&T is. D&T, on average, does not win a game very quickly. Boros Energy, Mardu Energy, those decks can just pretty consistently kill you on turn 3 or turn 4 if you let them just kind of do their thing. They can get very silly, especially when Ajani flips or Goblin Bombardment gets involved. So let's mine this a little bit further. We're elated to see games decompress in Legacy as they become fairer. And I was very surprised to see this, because when I think about current Legacy, I am really thinking about combo. If you ask me, like, what decks are on my mind when I am deck building, my answers are Dimir Tempo, the biggest chunk of the metagame. That makes sense. I'm thinking about Mardu Energy. And then the next 4 or 5 things in a row would all be combo decks. So let's start with one of our boogeymen of the format, Oops All Spells. This has been a top 5 deck in Legacy for I think the entire period since the previous banning. And it started out as one of the absolute best decks in the format, and has largely stayed there, even if it oscillates a little bit from weekend to weekend. So every data set that you can sort by on MTG Goldfish has it as a top 5 deck, and top 3 is more common. When I think about the last month of Legacy in particular, the meteoric rise of the Epic Storm really comes to mind. Bryant Cook and the Stormtroopers have been working really hard to rebuild that deck. And if you haven't been keeping up with it, take a look at some of the mana bases of these decks. They are very different now than what you might have seen before. And there's going to be some crazy things in there, like plateaus, that you are just simply not used to seeing. So it's really kind of weird to see Plateau alongside Underground Sea as a pairing, but that is just kind of one of the places that we have ended up recently. There have been a lot of 4 to 5 color TES decks and other assorted storm decks running around that have kind of taken the protection to the next level. And Silence is used in 2 different ways in this deck. It is often used at the beginning of a combo turn to go, okay, I know the coast is clear for the remainder of the turn, but it is also just being used as a time walk in the current metagame because the format is so fast. A silence on your opponent's turn might keep them from winning the game so that you get to take another turn and have another chance to play Magic the Gathering. And keeping your opponent from, doing their own Oops All Spells combo turn, their Show and Tell combo turn, playing their critical Hate Bear. Sometimes all you need is just 1 more mana to make it to your next turn, 1 more card of just about any nature, and Silence is very good at doing that. And these decks have become very hard to disrupt because they are attacking on multiple different fronts. So they can do something like Silence as a protection spell or a time walk. They can also make you respect creatures by playing out things like Hexing Squelcher that might make you think about keeping your creature hate in a matchup where you are largely dealing with spells. And so your Swords to Plowshares that, supposedly is good in the format might not actually be particularly good against a deck that looks like this, but you might be forced to keep them in. Otherwise, it shuts off all your Force of Wills, Force of Negations, all that sort of jazz. While this particular build doesn't have it, Veil of Summer is also seeing some degree of play, and so attacking the hands won't always work against a deck like this one either. And if you're interested in a lot of the nuance about the Storm deck, the Eternal Glory podcast, my podcast with Bryant Cook and Brian Koval, recently did an episode really deep diving the difference between Oops and Storm, and it's really good content. I encourage you to check it out. And when I think about current Legacy, it's not just TES as a dominant combo deck. Again, Oops has been a top 5 deck forever, and you're going to see weekends where it just absolutely fucking mops up with something like a 57% win rate. I think that was the February 15th data set. And then there's other weekends where people kind of respect it appropriately or over-respect it to drive down its results. And then it might be at like a 49 or 50% win rate the following weekend. Again, you can decide whether that's healthy metagame activity or like, hey, this deck is too good, and if we don't dedicate XYZ number of resources towards it, it always beats us. But again, it's not just TES on the rise. Sneak and Show is doing really well, and not just Sneak and Show in particular. There also are a bunch of other people trying other show and tell combo variants. So I have run into mono blue or close to it Omnitel. I have run into green blue hybrid like Omni Show plus Acererak Alurin builds. And then I have run into the more traditional sneak attack builds with show and tell as well. So show and tell variants overall are doing pretty well. There's a handful of different ways that you can build it with a few different flex slot options. Sometimes you will see the one ring in there. Sometimes you will see stock up in there. Players have a lot of wiggle room in how exactly they adjust that deck. So if you're looking to the one to point to that's doing well, it is probably Sneak and Show. But all of them seem like solid options. And in terms of Legacy being fast, I want to talk about Sewer Valence Cam for just a second. Painter has been on the rise since the printing of the TMNT cards because of Sewer Valence Cam. And this has fundamentally changed how the deck operates. And if you're not super clued into Legacy, this is something you might have missed. Sewer Valence Cam is tutorable directly to the graveyard via Goblin Engineer. And this combos with Goblin Welder. So the idea is that you have a Goblin Welder, an artifact that you like, and a Sewer Valence Cam. You can do something as simple as combo this with a Mox Opal. So you have Mox Opal, Sewer Valence Cam, and a Goblin Welder. You tap that Mox for mana, you weld it into Sewer Valence Cam. The Sewer Valence Cam untaps the Goblin Welder, who then welds it back into Mox Opal. When this leaves play, this then untaps your Welder, and you repeat this process. So this is something that you can use to combo, but this is also a flash artifact, so you can also use this as a fog. It also, when you are done attempting to combo or do whatever, so you can say, generate infinite mana, you don't have anything else to do with it. You could then sack this to itself to draw 2 cards, weld it back in with Goblin Welder, and continue on your way. And so many of these Painter decks have gone to other cards. So for example, Legion Extruder is a very clean kill with this, where this can just enter, deal 2 damage to your opponent's face, and then you keep welding it in and out with the Sewer Valence Cam. And this doesn't require you to have any other payoff card. Like, if you generate infinite mana, you still need something to do with that. This is just a clean kill. And similarly, this is sort of the Iker wellspring of this format, and you can kind of use this to get through your entire deck if you need to. And when I thought about Painter maybe a year ago, I thought of a deck that happens to have a combo in it that is more frequently than not going to grind you out. And when I think of current Painter, I think, oh god, I'm dead on turn 2 if I don't interact with them. Because turn 1 Goblin Welder, turn 2 Goblin Engineer to tutor the Sewer Valence Cam to Graveyard can just kill you if you have an artifact land or a 0-cost artifact to get things kicking off. So a premier fair deck of the format has largely converted into a combo deck that now threatens to kill you on turn 2. And again, thinking about these various combo decks, when I think about top 10 decks in Legacy, I'm thinking like Oops and TES and Sneak and Show and Painter that are all these combo decks. So Watsy says, we're elated that Legacy has become fairer. I don't actually think it has become fairer. Now, admittedly, if your point of comparison is the only deck in the format is Dimir Reanimator because we left that alone for too long, maybe Legacy looks fairer in comparison to that unhealthy mess that we are left around with for too long. But in comparison to the legacy between that and now, I think combo is steadily on an uptick. Okay, now that I've set the stage with like the rise of combo in current legacy, I now want to go back to talking about energy because now it feels appropriate to do so. So I want to mine this here a little bit. Players have also begun to find success with another flavor of white creature-based aggro, reminiscent of modern Sporos energy deck. What do you mean begun to find success with? Again, this is a deck that has been all around for a very, very long time at this point. Clear top deck for the last 3 months at a bare minimum. I think the last year as well. Yeah, confirming the numbers here. It was a top 10 deck in Legacy as of a year ago, and is now like a top 3 or top 2 deck, depending on the exact range that you are sorting by. So no one is beginning anything here. This is a known quantity that has been rock solid for quite some time. And this is an incredibly fast aggro deck that is backed by discard. And again, the build that they showcased in the video had not the traditional 4 Thoughtseizes, but had 6 split between Thoughtseize and Cabal Therapy. And if we look at the sideboard of this, it's kind of wild how much of this is also anti-combo with 6 discard spells as a starting point in the main. Universally, these decks are basically forced to play a playset of Leyline of the Void because Oops All Spells exist. In addition to that, we also have Containment Priest, as that's something that can help cover Oops while also covering Sneak Attack. You have Clarion Conqueror that we have already discussed in this video as well, and this is something that this deck can't really accelerate out in most cases. The exception being like turn 1 Guide of Souls, turn 2 Amped Raptor, gain an energy, go up to 3, randomly spike it off of Amped Raptor. But then there's like Null Rods here as well, and you can decide whether or not you view these as fair tools to get rid of Murktide Regents and Tamios or unfair tools to attempt to counter Show and Tells. They do a little of both. But these decks are, generally speaking, gearing for combo in their sideboard games, rationalizing that their deck is fast enough and consistent enough that you can run over a lot of the mid-rangey and control stuff just by the nature of your deck building. And overwhelmingly, their sideboards, again, are looking something like this, unless they are doing something to cater towards the mirror match. Which is very reasonable to do when you have a deck that has been this consistent for as long as it has been. So for example, Boiling Earth is a bit of a pull. It deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, and it also has a late game mode of Awakening to turn 1 of your lands into a creature as well. And you also might see energy players looking to get a leg up in the mirror, reaching for additional copies of just spot removal spells of some kind. It's sort of fascinating to me here how our author loves seeing Fair Swords to Plowshares and Fair Cabal Therapy But Oops All Spells is like the ultimate predator of decks like this that just want to be playing like good, honest, fair Magic. The Oops All Spells community quotes a 78% game one win percentage if they don't, or sorry, I think it's game one, turn one win percentage if they know that they don't have to deal with Force of Will. And it is just kind of wild to have both of these things addressed in the same article, but not kind of make the connection. Like these fair D&T style decks just simply cannot keep up in a world where they are getting turn one that frequently in game one, and then need to like hope to open up on a Leyline of the Void both games in the post sideboard games, and hope that their opponent can't answer that Leyline, or that they did not pivot into like creatures or Goblin Charbelchers that just beat them through their dedicated hate anyway. Like, I look at these decks and I see these sideboards just absolutely full of tools to fight against combo in both cases. And I don't think that the folks at WotC are viewing this in the same way that I am. So overall, as far as this statements go, did the Mardu Energy decks begin to have success? No, they've been having it for a very long time. So next I want to delve into something at the very end here. So the top of the standings at different events are distinct from one another, with different macro archetypes and decks taking turns in the spotlight. I'm not sure how I feel about this statement, so I'm maybe not going to evaluate this one in a true false sort of way. When I read this comment, I think back to the golden era of like SCG coverage and having a super dynamic metagame where from weekend to weekend, you know what people learned the previous weekend, and you are trying to respond to it, and you are trying to respond to the ways that you anticipate other people responding. And you kind of get that healthy rock, paper, scissors. And I do think we are seeing some healthy rock, paper, scissors going on in Legacy right now. But I think it's like rock, paper, scissors, but you do kind of know who the players are ahead of time and what they tend to do. So while we certainly live in a Legacy world where there is a fluctuating metagame, it is a fluctuating metagame where Dimir Tempo and Mardu Energy and Oops All Spells have been rock solid players for a very long time. And it feels like a lot of the rest of Legacy is the supporting cast. And I've recorded podcast episodes where I say, like, okay, current Legacy is Tamiyo decks, anti-Tamiyo decks, and decks that simply do not care about Tamiyo. And I think there's definitely some centralizing pull to current Legacy where Tamiyo really changes things. So for example, your pile of 1-power creatures looks really, really bad in the face of Tamiyo Plus and Orcish Bowmaster's Ping. There's a lot of deck building tension there on the format. Oops All Spells is one of the most absurd checks that a Legacy deck has to make. And a ton of what is viable right now is just things that potentially can disrupt Oops and then race. And it's not just Oops, right? A ton of the rest of the top 10 of Legacy is full of, TES and Sneak and Show and Painter. The hybrid Show and Tell Allurin deck had a small spot in the sun, to use the language from the article, or the time in the spotlight, I think it was. And it feels like so many Legacy games are not settling in for long dynamic gameplay. They're trying to end things very quickly. And I can tell you, as someone who records a Legacy League just about every day, I spend less time recording than I used to, very, very noticeably. And that is because people are trying to go fast. They are trying to play these threats that can scale up very quickly. Your super shredders, your moon shadows. Pinnacle Emissary is a great example where that card can just go crazy and make the better part of 10 power on turn 1. And like if you have Patchwork Automaton and Pinnacle Emissary in the same hand, like those things are going to go wild. Kappa Cannoneers can come out the gates very, very quickly. And while we certainly do see some cool things pop up from time to time, I think we are more getting cool things that are like, oh, this mono black aggro deck splashed blue for days because Thoughtseize wasn't enough by itself, sorts of things. Then we are like, oh my god, look, it's Maverick. That's so cool. Good job, Maverick player. So I just pulled a random legacy challenge from recently here. This one is from this weekend. This was the 21st. So we see an Oops All Spells win. This is the sort of thing that I would be, excited to see. This was the actual factual Tron deck. That sort of thing popping up is super cool. But then we see like incredibly fast deck, incredibly fast deck. This was the same deck as second place, and Dimir Tempo, incredibly fast deck, another Oops All Spells. And then as we continue out here, you see a lot more fast combo. Infect Sighting is kind of cool as well, right? So there's very few decks here that are looking to settle in for a very, very long game. And occasionally you will see people playing with, Up the Beanstalk and Tamiyo and Uro and whatnot. But I think the average game of Legacy is relatively fast right now. Maybe it's not like Entomb Reanimate threatens to just have you dead every single game, and you can't necessarily tell whether or not your opponent is Reanimator levels of Toxic or anything. But I would say that Legacy currently has some things of concern, and I think that's going to bring me to the last thing that I want to say. Let's zero in the kind of passing thought here. We can't wait to see the next stage of the format. Now, I know what our author meant in writing that, but I think many members of the Legacy community are going to read that in a very different way. The author's intent there was probably exciting. That's the PR sign-off. Like, we can't wait to see what happens next. And I, as a highly entrenched Legacy player, read that and went, yeah, me too. That's what I came here for, and I didn't get it. It is very, very frustrating trying to showcase cool decks for the channel and just losing to Oops instantly and not realistically having any chance in the matchup. And I will spend more time sideboarding than I do playing Magic. This is a terrible gameplay experience, and I can't wait for the next stage of the Legacy format where I don't have to deal with that anymore. I can't wait for the next stage of the Legacy format where, our next Ragavan style card is ejected from the format. I think current Legacy is good, but I don't think it's great. And I think it is very, very close to being great. I would love to not have to dedicate 4 sideboard slots in every single deck that I play to Leyline of the Void, and often have that not be enough to win versus Oops All Spells. I would love to dedicate those cards to other combo matchups more realistically. And something that you'll hear a lot in my deck techs in the coming weeks, I'm recorded a week or two ahead at this point, is you will hear me say, I have to respect Oops All Spells or I will die to it. Because I have to do this, I don't have enough for Show and Tell, and then I will get paired against Show and Tell 3 times in that league, and it's like, well, shit, knew this was a problem in advance. And a lot of decks, especially the fair decks, can't cover all of these fair combo decks at the same time. And that's part of the problem of trying to play Swords to Plowshares in the current format. Is as a white deck, you don't get the generic catch-all in game 1 of Thoughtseize to buy you time or potentially let you steal a game 1 versus a lot of these combo decks. And I know I'm memeing it up a little bit because I really like the card, but a huge portion of why I have been playing like Moon Shadow and Super Shredder decks for the channel is that those decks get to be black to have access to that discard in game 1, and it's a really, really, really big deal as of right now. So I'm gonna try to have fun recording Legacy for the next couple of months. I'm not sure exactly when the next B&R update is going to be. I think it is going to coincide with our next set, which I think is the Return to Strixhaven thingy that I've forgotten the name of off the top of my head. And I'm going to get in there. I'm going to enjoy the matches. I think there's going to be a decent number of non-games versus Oops and non-games versus Tameo, but hopefully we play against some of the cool things. Hopefully we see some metagame movement. Maybe there are still some sleepers in TMNT that haven't fully been explored for legacy purposes. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and call it a day, get this edited, and get it out to you all. So I hope this was useful and enjoyable. People tended to like this the last time around when I did it, and if that is the case, I will plan on breaking down these B&R updates like this moving forward in this pseudo solo podcast episode style format. All right, folks, have a great rest of the day. See ya. Okay, I thought of one more thing after the video that I wanted to make sure that I put into the video. A lot of times in this video, I am just simply referring to the author of this piece as the author or WotC. I am trying not to get any hate directed at one individual who is probably just doing her best to do her job. I think Carmen being asked to cover so many different formats for the B&R update is a very, very tough ask. So perhaps don't direct your hate at any one individual if you are upset by a thing of no changes. All right. Have a good day, folks. See ya.